It had been well over a year since I last slept in my own bed, and I was actually looking forward to it. A massive storm brewing in the ocean and heading our way forced me to order a complete shutdown of all the oil rigs. It was a tough decision, but it had to be made. Given the latest meteorological reports, I wasn't willing to take any risks by continuing to drill at this new site until the weather cleared. This was the 6th well I was drilling in this area consecutively, and I wanted to avoid any major issues that could set us back 6 months and cost millions. The incoming weather was slow-moving and appeared to be rotating, gaining size and strength while leaving destruction in its wake. The higher-ups believed we were in for a direct hit, but they left the decision to me. That was typical of the executives sitting in their offices in blue suits. If I made the wrong call, I'd be the scapegoat. If I made the right one, they'd take the credit. Each of the 5 oil-producing rigs in the area was spaced 20 nautical miles apart in a horizontal row. Due to the rock formation beneath the seabed, we were drilling once again at a 45-degree angle to reach the oil and natural gas buried below. We had spent the last 220 hours retrieving our drills and sealing all the pipelines near the seabed. It required precise timing with our deep-water diving crew. Manually shutting off the wells at the seabed level took about an hour and had to be done carefully to minimize the intrusion of salt water. Fortunately, everything went smoothly. We halted the oil flow to the production rigs at the seabed in case the approaching hurricane caused damage to our surface structures. All the crude oil that had been collected was transferred to tankers for safe transport to the mainland. The piping was pulled up, sealed at both ends, and securely locked down to prevent it from sinking if it broke loose. We had learned from BP's mistakes that there was no margin for error, so ensuring those pipe sections stayed afloat was critical. A helicopter brought the last few of us back to the coast. Following company policy, we aimed to leave as little of an environmental footprint as possible. Under my watch, I vowed we would never face a BP-type disaster. I wasn't due for time off for another 2 months, so I knew my arrival home would be a complete surprise. I was eager to see my wife, our kids, and our next-door neighbors who had become good friends. The great thing about my job was that I had a steady base salary year-round, even if I wasn't working. However, the real money came when I was out on the oil rigs. Over the past 3 years, this arrangement had paid off significantly. I spent about 85% of my time on the rigs, which tripled my base pay before even considering the overtime, which for me averaged around 32 hours a week. On the rigs, we typically worked 12-hour shifts, and when we were drilling, we only stopped when I was completely exhausted. Experts like me in angle drilling were in high demand and were compensated accordingly. I had a flawless record so far, having never lost a drilling site. Thanks to the booming U.S. economy, oil drilling was at its busiest, and as a result, I was earning top dollar because they couldn't find anyone to replace me. The market for professionals with my skills was incredibly tight. When I received my latest promotion over 5 years ago, I decided I wanted to retire early. So, with the cooperation of human resources, I had my paycheck divided into 3 parts whenever I was on the rigs. My 401k had always been maxed out from the beginning. 25% of my pay was automatically transferred to my investment broker, and the rest went directly into our joint bank account. What had gone into our account had been impressive. By doing this for the past 5 years, I had been building a solid financial cushion, thanks to the strong performance of the stock market and the economy. My wife and I had agreed years ago that once our house account reached a certain level, we would start making large lump sum payments on our mortgage. Any surplus after the mortgage was paid off would be split monthly and deposited into separate savings accounts. As a result, over the last 20 years of marriage, I had already emptied my savings account 4 times when it reached the maximum federally insured amount and transferred the funds to my investment manager. I had instructed my investment broker to divide my investments into 3 parts. 1/3 went into the company's stock, another third into technology stocks like Google, Amazon, and Facebook, and the last third into dividend-paying blue-chip stocks. The investor reports were sent directly to my company email account. Since I was often at sea around tax time, my wife and I had always filed separately, with her claiming the deductions for our children. If we were directly hit by the rapidly intensifying Category 3 hurricane, no one would be able to return to the rigs until a thorough 100% inspection was completed. I was meticulous about details like this because I would never put the lives of the men working with me at risk. A team would be sent down to inspect the Gulf seabed before any reconnection efforts could begin. No matter what, it looked like I would have at least 2 months off. Most people didn't realize that the more the ocean was stirred on the surface, the harder the shoreline was impacted by water flow. The backflow, depending on its strength, could create ripples on the seabed that would eventually dissipate into nothing. With this hurricane's slow movement, the longer it lingered over our sites, the more it would cost in reconstruction. So I would be closely monitoring the weather over the next few days to estimate how long I would be off work. I had been part of the advisory team that developed these new procedures after our parent company, BP, lost billions because they ignored our recommendations before the last disaster. Spending a few $1,000,000 today saved us billions in litigation costs and government-related hassles later on. These days, giving the government any opportunity to take your money is like inviting them to rip you off without even a kiss. BP learned the hard way about the real costs when democratically elected governments treated those accused of environmental pollution like they were at their mercy. Many questionable charges were billed to the corporation that couldn't be directly tied to BP's actions. People in the industry believed the governments used the situation to their advantage, resolving issues they had created themselves. Most in the oil industry learned from that major screw-up and now budget for at least one long-term shutdown somewhere. They've adopted a cover-your-own-back policy, no matter the cost. In many ways, BP is still recovering. Shauna and I met our neighbors, Jack and Jasmine Parsons, shortly after we bought our current home. At that time, she was 3 months pregnant with our first child, a boy. Hunter Allen Phillips was born weighing 7 pounds. Sarah Louise came along less than 4 years later. The house was too big for us initially, but we grew into it. Now both of our children are almost out of their teens. Hunter just turned 20, and Sarah is counting down the days until she can get rid of her learner's permit. Jack and Jasmine, who had just gotten married when we first met them, were never able to have children for reasons they never disclosed. Over the years, they became like an adopted aunt and uncle to our kids and our closest friends. Jack was a bit older than us, while Jasmine was 9 years younger. To me, Jasmine was one of the most beautiful African-American women I had ever met. If any woman could have tempted me to stray from my marriage vows, it would have been her. I never understood what she saw in Jack. He was just an ordinary guy with no class, questionable morals, and a habit of lying, but he was an incredible salesman. I was sitting in the Tampa airport, waiting for my flight to St. Louis, and reading the local Wednesday paper when a text message came through. It said, "Dad, when you get a chance, give me a call." It was from my daughter Sarah. I wondered for a moment if she had changed much in the 14 months since I had last been home. For seasoned oil men like me, it was always the family that bore the greatest burden of my absence, which is why I had been seriously contemplating finding a different path for the remainder of my life. I called her immediately. "Hi, Dad," she answered. "Thanks for calling so quickly." "What's going on, Buttercup?" I replied. Buttercup was the nickname I gave her because when she was little, we used to spend countless afternoons gathering enough of them to fill a small vase for her mother. It meant a lot to us, though her mother would thank her and then forget about it. I kept them in water, removing the wilted ones daily until it was time to gather more. "I'm not sure where to begin, Dad," Sarah said honestly. "How about just the basic facts?" I suggested, thinking it might not be serious. "Okay, here it goes," she said. "Hunter's in the hospital undergoing surgery to repair a bullet wound to his shoulder. Uncle Jack is in jail, charged with attempted murder. Aunt Jasmine is finally pregnant and is 3 months along. Are you serious? I responded. This sounds unreal. Well, you asked for the basic facts, Sarah said. That's what I gave you. But there's more I think you should understand before you talk to Mom. Why do you think that, Buttercup? I asked seriously. The whole situation is complicated, and it's not as straightforward as it seems, Sarah replied, without going into detail. You always taught us that there are 2 sides to every story, and that you need to uncover the real facts before deciding what to believe. Sarah put it well. Over the years, I had often told you that I'd heard your side of the story from your perspective, but now I needed to find out the facts before making any decisions. Mom will tell you what she wants you to hear, and possibly believe, Sarah said. To do that, she'll skip over certain facts she doesn't want you to ever know about. The situation with my brother, aunt, and uncle involves her as well. Okay, Buttercup. I'm about to catch a plane to St. Louis and will be on the first flight back to Cape in the morning, I said. Skip school tomorrow and I'll take a taxi home when I arrive. By then your mother will have gone to work. You're coming home, that's great. Mom's in New York, Sarah said. Macy's wanted all their store managers in this district at the head office for a big meeting on how to increase sales and reduce overall inventory levels to lower operational costs. This region is still one of the few making a good profit, and upper management is trying to figure out what makes this district successful. Has she been informed? I asked. No, I'm still at the hospital waiting to hear from the doctor, Sarah explained. I'm outside calling you because I thought you should be the first to know. I really don't want to involve her until after we've talked. Let someone in billing know that I'll bring our medical cards first thing in the morning, I said. Thanks, Buttercup, for texting me. Love you. See you in the morning. After saying our goodbyes, I got ready to go through security and head to the waiting area. It gave me time to reflect on the 4 of us and our relationships with each other over the years. Throughout our entire married life, I had been working on the rigs, starting from the bottom and gradually moving up. During the long stretches at sea, I started pursuing every possible degree in my field out of sheer boredom, which set me on the path to where I am now. I remember the day I met Shauna. She had pulled into a Walmart to grab a few things and was driving a bit too fast. She didn't notice the black ice and couldn't slow down, which resulted in her bumping into the old clunker I was driving at the time. She got out of her car, clearly stressed and upset because she was driving her father's vehicle. There wasn't much damage to her bumper, and as for my old truck, a couple more scratches weren't going to make any difference. After parking our cars, we went into the subway inside Walmart, and she bought me a 6-inch sub and a coffee as a way of saying thanks for being understanding. When Shauna took off her winter coat, she caught my eye. She had a great figure with curves in all the right places, but what really stood out was her personality, which was just as attractive as her looks. I have to admit, it was Shauna who made me get serious about life. Before meeting her, I was just a carefree guy, enjoying life and making the most of any opportunity with women that came my way. I loved to party and hang out with friends, then go back to the rigs broke, ready to sober up and start fresh. But when I first saw Shauna, I could tell she wanted more out of life. That first weekend we spent together gave me purpose and direction. Within a month, I went back to school to better myself. The deeper we got involved, the more determined I became. It seems she had a similar impression of me, as her parents often remarked that I had helped her become a better person. 8 months later, we got engaged, and 6 months after that, we were married. Shortly after, I began working offshore on the big rigs because my superiors noticed a significant improvement in everything I did. I owe that to Shauna. I started earning what was considered a substantial income at the time, unaware of how addictive that paycheck would become. Looking back, I realize we both pushed each other to grow up and become adults. So far, I have no regrets in our journey together. Shauna earned a business degree and began her career as a department manager in the women's clothing section at Macy's, working on a base salary plus commissions. To her, retail merchandising was an art that few truly understood. She excelled in it, moving to a new department every couple of years. After proving herself in each role, she was offered a junior management position. When the smallest store manager position became available, she was asked to fill in until a suitable replacement was found. No one expected that the training and guidance she provided would lead to significant growth in sales and the store's reputation. One day, the area supervisor came in and told her that the store manager position was hers. 3 years ago, she was finally promoted to store manager at their location in Cape. This was her third move since becoming a store manager, and by far the largest. It was great because she was now working within 10 miles of home. As she put her mark on the store, sales began to soar, making it one of the fastest-growing stores in the division. Jack Parsons was an independent wholesaler who earned his living by driving his route, selling the tools provided by his suppliers. His customers were everyday folks who made a living by fixing and repairing cars. I wasn't sure exactly how much he made, but judging by his spending habits, it was clear he wasn't struggling. I couldn't understand why our area wasn't included in the territory he covered. Jack was well connected and had a talent for obtaining things that others couldn't. He often came home with surprising, expensive gifts for his beloved wife. He puzzled me because he appeared to be simple and carefree. One thing that stood out was that he always paid for everything in cash. He didn't like using credit or debit cards at all. The only bank account they had was in his wife's name. Jasmine had been with the Southeastern Missourian newspaper for years, starting as a staff reporter and eventually becoming an assistant editor. She was highly respected in the community and served on several boards. Her generous and caring nature made her a beloved figure in our town. If you saw us together, you might wonder how we became friends. Jasmine and Jack were African American, while Shauna and I are English American, with roots going back 6 generations. When our kids were little, whenever we needed a break, Jasmine would spoil them silly. When they were out with our kids, if anyone asked, Jack would always joke that they had adopted them. He found it amusing, especially when people believed him. It was even funnier for him when the kids started calling him Uncle Jack. Our kids grew up being thoroughly spoiled by them, and I felt truly blessed to have them in our lives. For most of my flight, I was trying to make sense of everything that was happening. All 4 of us led busy lives, so nothing I had heard seemed to add up. Yet, Sarah had made it clear that our relationship was what connected everything. I had a 3-hour layover in St. Louis before catching my connecting flight home. If you're familiar with the St. Louis airport, you know how poorly designed it is. A few years ago, they closed down the indoor smoking areas, seemingly just to frustrate smokers. The restaurants open at that time of day were awful. If you wanted to smoke, you had to leave the airport and go through security again to re-enter. Meanwhile, some people were vaping right in front of you. Now they were saying that it wasn't the tar and nicotine that caused cancer, but rather the lingering smoke in the air. One thing they never mentioned was that our genetics played a bigger role than our habits. It was our DNA that posed the real problem. Given the issues some people were facing from using illegal products containing harmful oils, I figured it wouldn't be long before health authorities started pushing for anyone cooking with pure or synthetic oil to wear masks to avoid inhaling oil into their lungs. It seemed like just a few incidents were enough for the media to blow things out of proportion. I was standing outside the airport, finally giving in to one of the few pleasures I had left, smoking a Marlboro full-flavor cigarette. One perk of working on offshore deep-sea rigs was that the small retail stores there didn't have all the usual taxes, so I could get my favorite cigarettes for less than $20 a carton. On my last trip home, I brought 6 cartons with me. I implemented a rule banning alcoholic beverages on the rigs. Although the men opposed it, their wives were grateful, sending thank you letters for the money that was saved. This rule also made it easier to meet the goals I had set. To the wives, I was a hero. To the men, I was nothing but a nuisance. Being an American comes with the privilege of paying hidden taxes so that our politicians can waste millions on falsehoods and nonsense without any sense of guilt or accountability. If they overspent, they would simply introduce a new tax, which would be quickly forgotten by the public. Our tax laws are so complicated that understanding them is harder than figuring out a woman, and I had always been terrible at both. Most people were unaware that in 1822 the federal government introduced a 1% import tax to support the First Nation people, whom they had marginalized and overlooked. Reflecting on that old tax law, which had never been repealed, the question arose, did they ever benefit from it? "Hey Harold, it's been a long time," a familiar voice from the past greeted me as I stood there smoking. "I see you never quit since high school." "Well, damn, Gus," I replied with a wide grin. "You're looking good for an old-timer like me." "Where are you headed?" he asked. "Back to the Cape. That's where I live with my wife and our 2 kids," I said. "Got sent home early because of the weather on the rigs." "Still doing that stuff?" he asked with a smirk. "When are you going to quit being a redneck and get a real job like the rest of us?" "I'm working on my retirement," I said. "Maybe sooner than you think. I'm looking for something that will keep me home at night. Shauna will be surprised when I tell her." "You married Shauna Richards?" Gus asked, completely taken aback. "Yeah, I met her while working on the rigs in Texas during a break," I said. "She was in business college at the time." "I'm shocked," he said. "My younger sister used to hang out with her in high school. Back then, the only boys they were interested in were African American. My sister ended up marrying one, but he divorced her after their second child and disappeared. It was a tough few years for her, but now she's a lawyer and doing great." We chatted for a few more minutes before going through security together. Our brief conversation revolved around who from our glory days was still around and what they were up to now. I found out he was married with 3 children. Finally, I was on the last leg of my journey and eager to get home to talk to my daughter. Our last conversation had been on my mind throughout the entire trip. The taxi dropped me off at my door, and I carried my own suitcases inside. My daughter greeted me with a tight hug, and I could tell she was still overtired and had been crying. After the usual greetings and asking how she was holding up, we got into the heart of the matter. "Dad," Sarah began, "over the last 2 years, I noticed a change in Mom's routine. At first, I thought it was because of her big promotion to the Cape store in the mall. With her new responsibilities," I reminded her, "things would need to change initially, but after a few months a pattern should have formed, and by then things should have settled down. What exactly caught your attention?" "At first, I didn't think much of it," Sarah explained, "until one Friday night when my date's parents took us to Outback for dinner. I was sitting in the back corner near the women's restroom, facing the wall, when I saw Mom coming out. Out of curiosity, I followed her, and the person she was having a private romantic dinner with was Uncle Jack. That was interesting because Jasmine always worked very late on Friday nights, preparing the big Sunday morning edition for printing late Saturday night since it was the largest and thickest paper of the week. Shauna also always worked Friday nights until the store closed at 11 p.m. and on Saturdays because those were the busiest times. My boyfriend, who was 17 at the time, and I started exploring on Friday nights just to see what we could find," Sarah continued. "We discovered that Uncle Jack always left his huge truck locked behind Macy's receiving bay. Mom would drive her car to meet him around 6 p.m. When he got into Mom's car, he took over the driving with her sitting right beside him. Dad. She sat with him just like I would with my boyfriend. There was no space between them." I wasn't fond of the story Sarah was sharing, but I believed she was truthful in her observations. "I informed Hunter about what we discovered," my daughter explained. "He told me to leave it to him and his friends to investigate. While working as an apprentice at the Ford dealership, he has met quite a few people. It didn't take long before he found out that Uncle Jack has been renting a small apartment where he meets his lover every Wednesday afternoon and Friday evening. It was Hunter who broke the news to Aunt Jasmine." I took my daughter's hand and said, "I believe you. Please continue." Aunt Josie turned to Hunter for support and comfort while she was trying to decide what to do. Sarah continued, I'm not sure who seduced whom, but Hunter and Aunt Jasmine became lovers. From what Hunter told me last night, it's been going on for over a year. The child Aunt Jasmine is carrying is Hunter's. Uncle Jack is sterile. Apparently he had chickenpox as a child. I got up, went to my liquor cabinet, and grabbed a bottle of sour mash. After hearing what my daughter had just explained, I knew I needed a strong drink. I poured 3 ounces into a glass and returned to sit across from her. "How long have your mother and Uncle Jack been lovers?" I asked. "At least 18 months that I know of," my daughter replied. "They've been meeting up regularly on Friday nights and Wednesday afternoons." "So they were already involved when I was last home," I said quietly. "What happened yesterday that led to Hunter getting shot?" I asked. "Mom wasn't with Uncle Jack, so he came home," Sarah explained. "He found his wife and my brother in bed together. In the heat of the argument, he accidentally shot Hunter." "What a mess," I said. "I should go see Hunter and get his side of the story, but not right away. Later today, you and I will need to provide our insurance details to the hospital, and I have to find a good divorce attorney. When is your mother supposed to be back?" "Sometime Saturday morning," Sarah said. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to call a taxi to take me to a car rental company," I said. "Then I'll find a hotel because I can't stay here. When I return with the rental, we'll get a few things done. Tonight, I want you to call your mother with your phone on speaker so I can record it for my lawyer." Tears streamed down my daughter's face, and she understood that her mother's actions had left me with no other option. I could see she had anticipated this moment. Through her sobs, she said, "I've been dreading this day for months. I prayed it would go away, but it's only gotten worse. Dad, if it's possible, I want to live with you." "If that's truly what you want, Buttercup, I'll make it happen," I reassured her. "I'm home for at least 2 months, which gives me time to find a place to live and a new job. But for now, it's best if your mother doesn't know I'm home." "You're serious, aren't you?" she asked. "Yes, I am," I replied. "But it might mean you'll have to change schools." I don't think I've ever been hugged so tightly in my life. Sarah didn't want to leave my side, so when the taxi arrived, she came with me. Before we left, we called the school to ensure we wouldn't be contacted. Jasmine saw me getting into the taxi, so she knew I was home. She texted me saying, "We need to talk." I replied, "I know. I'll contact you after I take care of a few things. Our daughter is emotional, upset, and scared right now. She needs me." At first, I was surprised to learn that Jasmine was home, but it made sense when I thought about it. After what had happened yesterday, she had her own emotions to process. I chose a small, inexpensive car to drive because I knew my wife would never believe I'd drive something like that. I've been a Ford man my whole life. We left Cape and headed to Marble Hill, where I booked a room for a week at an inexpensive motel. I chose that area because it was far enough away that no one would think to search for me there. After checking in, we went to Southeast Hospital to present our insurance cards and complete the necessary paperwork. Following that, we went out for lunch. Hunter called his sister, and they chatted for a while. We found out that Jasmine was with him and that he was aware I was back. I overheard my daughter telling him to keep that information to himself for the time being. Sarah mentioned that we would be informing his mother about the situation later that evening. After lunch, our first stop was a real estate office. I wanted to see what businesses were for sale in the surrounding area. Surprisingly, nothing available was particularly appealing to me, but I asked the broker to keep an eye out for any opportunities. I also made arrangements to view a few houses on Friday, asking the broker to focus on properties that were move-in ready. Once I got back home, I called my superiors to update them on the situation. I felt it was important to let them know that after over 20 years with the organization, there was a possibility I might need to resign. My daughter, who is still a minor, wants to live with me. The last thing I did was set up an appointment with a lawyer for Monday. Using my mobile phone, I checked our home account and saw that there were $50,000 in it, while my personal savings account now had $250,000. With the house fully paid for, we were in a good financial position. Considering how everything was arranged, the divorce process would have been simple. One of us would have to buy out half of the other's house, and we would split the money in the family account. "Buttercup, I'll be back soon," I said. "I'm going to talk to Jasmine. It's time to listen to her version of what happened." Jasmine opened the door for me as soon as I knocked. Just by looking at her, I saw how tense she was. "I'm sorry, Harold," Jasmine said. "You shouldn't have come home in such a mess. Would you like something to drink while we're talking?" "Of course, it's been a long and difficult day," I replied. "I'm still trying to process everything in myself." When she poured us a strong drink, I said, "Start from the beginning, from the moment when it started touching you." "I was busy in my office when Hunter asked for a private meeting," Jasmine began. "Knowing that your anniversary is approaching, I thought he was planning a surprise party. But in private, he told me that Sarah and Jack were having an affair. I didn't believe him at first. I accused him of lying and demanded proof. He took me to my husband's love nest. What we saw that day through the open window of his apartment on the ground floor left no doubt. Jack was with your wife. I was devastated." With that, she took out her cell phone and pulled up a few images to show me. I could see the dates they were taken, which matched the timeline Jasmine and my daughter had given me. Now I had the digital proof. "Jasmine, could you text me those images, please?" I requested. "I'll need them for my divorce petition. This may not mean much, but I found out very early this morning that when my wife was in high school, she only dated African-American boys." Jasmine's eyes widened at this revelation before she said, "Maybe those seemingly innocent touches over the years weren't so innocent after all. Could she have been pursuing him all these years?" "We'll never know," I replied. "So how did things happen between you and Hunter?" "He's like you, Harold," she said. "He was just there, holding my hand, giving me moral strength and support. One night, when I was in tears, he held me while we were sitting on the couch. I admit we were drinking some wine, but we weren't anywhere near drunk. I lifted my head toward his and kissed him. He kissed back, and that kiss was filled with more love than I'd felt in a long time." "The closeness we shared that night gradually deepened," Jasmine confessed. "About 6 months ago, we crossed the line. He brought me back to life again. It wasn't out of revenge on my part." I could understand. My job, the distance, and the time spent away had caused the same issues in my marriage. We both knew it, but neither of us could be honest enough to admit it. Despite being married, we were like strangers living under the same roof. Each time I returned home, we had to rebuild our relationship to find some balance again. But then I would have to leave for another 6 months. This was one of the main reasons I was seriously considering leaving my career. Jasmine watched me, waiting for a response, so I said, "Thank you for being honest. I'll let Hunter handle things between the two of you. He established his independence long ago. I'll support both of you no matter what you decide. Just so you know, your timeline and the images have been confirmed by another source." "Thank you, Harold. That means a lot." "Hunter said you would approach our relationship this way," she replied, tears in her eyes. "What set Jack off yesterday was being served with the divorce papers. He was already under a court order to stay away." In that moment, the shooting made sense. Jack had always lost his temper when things didn't go his way and reacted without thinking. He had come home to confront Jasmine, only to find her in bed with Hunter. Enraged, he lashed out because Hunter was standing up for Jasmine, just as I would have. I knew Jack owned a gun because he carried it for protection, given the rough areas his work took him into. "Jasmine, for reasons I can't fully explain right now, you need to believe that I'm out of town for the next few days," I said. "That's why I rented a car. Sarah has already made it clear that she wants to live with me." I left with what I came for. I had heard her truth and obtained proof that Jack and my wife's affair began before my son's involvement. When I got home, I sat down and shared everything I had learned with my daughter. "Dad, That makes a lot of sense. Everyone knows Hunter is very mature for his age, Sarah noted. The evidence you have, along with Hunter's full disclosure to me, gives it credibility. From the time he got his first car, I said, he was always dating older women. I guess that's partly my fault. With me not being around much, he stepped up and became the de facto man of the house. I wasn't much older than him when he was born, I added. I realized before I went over there that, no matter how I felt, my son was going to do what he was going to do. Whether I like it or not, it's their lives to live, so we have to let them. Dad, do you think it's time I called Mom and let her know what's going on? My daughter asked. First, go to the App Store and see if you can find an app that lets you record your conversations, I suggested. Sarah began searching. It was frustrating because, after downloading, we would test them out, and most turned out to be overhyped and disappointing. Eventually, we found one that did exactly what we needed. I made sure to download the same one. It took 3 rings before Shauna picked up. Sarah had already activated the speaker. Mom, I'll need a note for missing school today, Sarah said. Why did you miss school? Are you feeling sick? Shauna asked. No, I spent most of last night at the hospital with Hunter, Sarah explained. By the time I got home, I was too exhausted to go to school. What happened to Hunter? Shauna asked, her voice filled with concern. He was shot in the shoulder at close range, Sarah stated. What? Are you serious? How is he? Will he still have full use of his shoulder? Shauna asked anxiously. How did it happen? Don't leave anything out. It happened because you weren't at your usual place on Wednesday afternoon, Sarah said confidently. What does that even mean? We both know I'd be at work. Are you saying Hunter was shot in the store? Shauna asked, knowing it wasn't true. No, Mom. That means you weren't at 644 Morgan Avenue, apartment 4 with Uncle Jack, Sarah explained. Shauna's silence was heavy. After thinking for a while, Shauna asked, How long have you known about this? Almost from the very beginning. I found out about you and Uncle Jack by accident when you had dinner with him on Friday night, Sarah explained. It took me a few weeks to figure out where Uncle Jack parked his tool truck so I could follow you pick it up. When I told my brother about it, he made inquiries and found your secret place with Uncle Jack. He took Jasmine there, and they managed to take a picture of him with you. The pictures are quite revealing, Sarah continued. I could hear Shauna sobbing before she said, I'm flying home Saturday morning. We need to sit down and sort this out before your father returns. Mom, there's more to it. Last Wednesday, Uncle Jack was served at your secret hideaway while waiting for you. I guess the short notice for New York made it hard for you to inform him, Sarah said. He stormed home, furious, to put his wife Jasmine in her place and make it clear there would be no divorce. Jack was determined to keep his affair and stay married. What he didn't realize was that his actions, along with yours, had driven Jasmine and Hunter together. I gave a thumbs up to show I agreed with what Sarah had said. Sarah smiled, realizing that her explanation made sense. Uncle Jack, defying a court order, went back to his old home and caught Jasmine and Hunter together, Sarah continued. In his rage, he grabbed a gun and shot Hunter. So, what should I tell Dad when I call him? What's the situation with Hunter and Uncle Jack now? Shauna asked. Uncle Jack is in jail facing attempted murder charges, Sarah replied. Hunter should recover fully, but he'll need extensive rehabilitation. So, Mom, what do you want me to tell Dad? Or should he find out the grim details from the newspaper tomorrow morning? Give me a few minutes to collect my thoughts, and I'll call him myself, Shauna said. It's best if I handle this directly. Okay, Mom, Sarah responded. By the way, congratulations. You're going to be a grandmother. Jasmine is 3 months pregnant, and Hunter says it's his. We also know you'll be served with papers by Jasmine as soon as you get home. Shauna really lost her cool. I wasn't too concerned because, after everything she'd done, her getting a taste of her own medicine seemed fair. Sarah waited for a reply, and when none came, she ended the call. After that, I got up and poured 2 sour mashes. I mixed one with ice and Coke and kept the other straight for myself. Placing the drinks in front of her, I said, "I'm having a grown-up drink with my daughter because she handled herself better than most adults would. I'm very proud of you, Buttercup." We both waited for the anticipated phone call. We finished our first drinks as adults, and I was in the process of making us each a second when my cell phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. When I sat back down with our drinks, I turned on the speaker and dialed the voicemail. It was amusing to hear that all Shauna had left was a brief message saying, "Call me when you get a moment. Uncle Jack accidentally shot Hunter, and we need to discuss it." "Dad, before you respond, let's check the online news," Sarah suggested. She got up and brought her laptop. When we checked, we saw the story had made the front page. The reporter had all the details, and the headline read, "Husband shoots, wife's lover." The article laid out everything, exposing the intricate relationships between the four of them. It was incredible how the whole tangled situation was laid bare. What shocked us the most was discovering that Jack Parsons, whose story had just been updated on the newspaper's website, wasn't his real name. He had been using a stolen identity for years. His real name was Raymond John Smith, and he had a record for petty theft. When his fingerprints were checked, his true identity was uncovered. The real surprise was that there was an outstanding warrant for his arrest for possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute. There was something about the name that stuck in my mind. After thinking about it for a moment, it clicked. The first thing I did was look up the phone number for the police department and informed the desk officer about his large tool truck and the area he covered. I suggested they obtain a search warrant and investigate. When the officer asked why, I replied, "Because no one who knows him has ever seen him sell anything out of it." I then searched for Gus Charles on Facebook. After scrolling through several profiles, I finally recognized his face. After reading his profile, I called information and got his phone number. When I called, a woman answered. It was his wife. "Ma'am, I'm an old school friend of your husband," I said. "I ran into him at the airport in St. Louis this morning, and we had a long chat. The reason I'm calling is that I need the name of his younger sister Ashley's former husband, who disappeared." "His name is Raymond John Smith," Gus's wife replied. "He owes over 16 years of back child support. You might want to inform her that he's currently sitting in the Cape Girardeau, Missouri jail. He was using a false identity under the name Jack Parsons." "Are you serious?" she asked. "Yes, I am. And could you do me a favor?" I said. "Let Ashley know that he was also having an affair with my wife, whose maiden name was Shauna Richards." "Oh my God, Ashley still talks about the wild things they did back then," she said. "This is going to hit her hard. Can I give Ashley your number?" "Please do," I replied. "My soon-to-be ex-wife will be arriving home on Saturday." Sarah was in shock. Honestly, I was too. I texted Jasmine to see if she was home and asked her to come over right away. "Dad, Mom knew who he was the first time you met them," Sarah said. "What other lies are we going to uncover?" "I don't know, but it seems like they're trying to relive their glory days," I replied. "I wonder what else they might be involved in." We took a few minutes to process all the information we had just discovered. It was overwhelming because the more my daughter and I learned, the more questions arose. When we heard the knock, Sarah went to answer the door. I got up and made a sour mash and Coke for Jasmine, which I handed to her when she came into the kitchen. The first thing we showed her was the updated online article, which was a real eye-opener for her. Sarah had remembered to text me the conversation between my wife and her, so I played it for Jasmine to give her context. "There's now a strong possibility that Jack's and your marriage might not even be legal," I said. "You should have your divorce lawyer look into it." "I've been at the hospital most of the day," Jasmine said. "I was just heading home when I got your text. There's no way he's getting bail." "It gets worse," I said. "He has 2 children, a daughter and a son, now fully grown. His ex-wife was Shauna's best friend in high school." The shock on Jasmine's face was something my daughter and I would remember for the rest of our lives. "They knew from the very first day we met," Jasmine said, tears streaming down her face. "If he had kids, why didn't I get pregnant sooner?" "It seems likely that he had a vasectomy before meeting you," I suggested. "It's the only explanation that makes sense." I fell silent for a moment while the two women discussed what they knew so far. I was trying to piece together what else might be going on. My instincts told me there was more to this story than we were aware of. "Ladies, I think we should all start going through everything in our houses," I proposed. "Something is missing from this puzzle, and I wonder if Shauna was involved in whatever Jack was up to. Given his history with prohibited substances, I can't help but think he might have hidden things. If he did, was Shauna involved?" "That seems far-fetched," Jasmine replied. "I know he drove his truck daily and would be gone overnight." "Okay, Jasmine, that's fair," I said. "But if Shauna was keeping his secrets, why? Did you ever see his booking records or receive numerous bills for the stock he bought?" "Jack always claimed that the corporation handled that and they owned the stock and equipment," Jasmine explained. "Then he should have received monthly statements via email or mail," I said. "Have you seen any of those? Did you ever notice him transferring money back to them?" "No, but I know Jack's Outlook account." "We could check that," she replied. We went to her house and booted up the home computer. After she signed in, she opened Windows Mail, but it showed no new messages. "May I?" I asked. In the search box at the bottom corner, I typed "hot." The Outlook icon appeared, so I clicked it. What wasn't visible in Windows Mail showed up when the browser opened. Jack had 4 unknown email accounts linked to the main one. It was clear he had been hiding something. "Jasmine, call the police station first thing in the morning and provide them with the access information for Jack's emails," I instructed. "I'm heading home to search the entire house for money or prohibited substances. I want to make sure our house hasn't been used for anything." "I'll do the same." "What should I do if I find something?" Jasmine asked. "Call me, and I'll come over so we can discuss what to do next. I'll be inspecting our home very thoroughly," I replied. "It's clear we need to protect ourselves." "Dad, do you really think Mom would let Jack store things in our house?" Sarah asked. "Given their relationship, I can't assume she wouldn't," I said. "Look first in areas you wouldn't normally check unless you had a specific reason." Sarah and I went home. I grabbed a flashlight and made sure it was working. "I'm heading to the garage to access the attic," I explained. "No one should have been up there since we had extra insulation installed." I had to reposition the rental, set up the ladder, and climb up to undo the clasp. With the high-density flashlight, I scanned the room but found nothing. As I turned on the ladder to look behind me and reached up for support, I felt something. I descended, repositioned the ladder, and climbed back up. There, lined up, were 5 large garbage bags, the kind I usually take to the curb weekly. When Sarah heard the first bag hit the floor, she rushed over. "Move it out of the way," I said. "I've got 4 more to drop." When the second bag hit the ground, it burst open, revealing bundles of $20 bills. I immediately wondered if there were prohibited substances hidden in Jasmine's house as well. After all 5 bags were on the garage floor, I noticed another flat bag off to the side. I picked it up and started down the ladder, pausing to lock the attic entrance behind me. "Sarah, run over to Jasmine's and tell her what we found while I go through these bags," I instructed. It took about 5 minutes for them to return. All 5 bags were a quarter full of cash bundles. The 6th bag contained Jack's ledger. "Harold, can you come over and check out my place?" Jasmine asked. "Right after I call the cops," I replied. I called the police, who assured me they'd send a patrol car. Jasmine, Sarah, and I went to her house, bringing Jack's ledger with us. While checking her attic, I discovered a small chest filled with bricks of prohibited substances and placed the ledger next to it. I then called the police again and asked for a detective to be sent along with the patrol car. It took over 3 hours for the officers to take possession of the money and prohibited substances. We had to provide a detailed account of everything from the shooting up to that point. After the detective left, he informed me that my wife would be taken into custody for questioning when she returned to Cape on Saturday. At the moment, we can't connect the money to anything, the detective said. It will be counted, documented, and secured. We'll record it as voluntarily surrendered by Mr. Phillips as found money. Thank you, officer, I replied. What about the prohibited substances we found at my neighbor's house? Since Jack Parsons lived there, he explained, and his wife, with your assistance, turned it in, she won't face charges, but he will. Will you return with a search warrant for either of us tomorrow? Jasmine inquired. Detective, you should note down my husband's email and password. Access it through Outlook directly using a browser. His email is jackparsonsoutlook.com with the password White Rabbit. We don't believe it's necessary, the detective said. If you find a small amount of prohibited substances, just flush it away. I suspect most of what Jack had is in his truck, which is currently being towed to the impound lot until we obtain a court order to search it. Thanks for the email information. I'll be seeking a court order to access it. We watched the police leave and I said, I don't know about you, but I could really use a strong drink. Jasmine went to secure her house and then joined us. Are you going to tell Mom what's happening? Sarah asked. I think if we do, it might tip her off that the money is there, I said. It's better to leave what we know with the detective. Tomorrow, while you're at school, I'll finish going through both houses to make sure there's nothing left behind. Thanks, Harold, I appreciate it, Jasmine said. Jasmine, I'll need you to follow me to the car rental company tomorrow, I said. Things have changed. There's no way I'm leaving my daughter alone. Can I stay here tonight? Jasmine asked. Sure, you can sleep in what used to be Hunter's room, I said. The three of us were woken up by police sirens in the middle of the night. The police had placed an unmarked car to watch our houses, and they caught someone trying to break into Jasmine's place. Around 5 a.m, I called my wife. I was sitting outside on the patio, having my first cup of coffee and a couple of cigarettes. She picked up right away. Harold, it's a mess here at home. Jack accidentally shot Hunter, Shauna said. The bullet went clean through. Fortunately, he's going to make a full recovery. The police are holding Jack until they finish their investigation. Have you spoken to Jasmine to see what she knows? I asked. No. Sarah and I have been spending most of our time at the hospital, she replied. I'll talk to her at her office later today and let you know what she says. Any idea when you'll be home? We all want to see you. Right now, we're keeping an eye on the weather and securing everything, I said. If an evacuation order comes through, I might be home sooner than expected. It took her a few seconds to respond. Are you serious? I replied, check the weather reports. We've got a hurricane heading our way, and we could get the order to evacuate within hours. If that happens, I'll be home. Promise me you'll call so I can make sure everything is ready at home if that happens, okay? Shauna asked. Okay, I said. Talk to you later. Bye. From our brief conversation, I realized she could never admit the truth, and she never would. It also became clear that any feelings she had left for me were completely gone. With that in mind, I could move forward with the divorce without any guilt. After dropping Sarah off at school, Jasmine followed me in my truck so I could return the rental car. We then went back to the hotel to return the key and pick up my luggage. I suggested that while I was away, she should visit Hunter and get the key to his apartment so she could stay there temporarily. The real estate agent and I looked at 4 houses, all previously owned, but I decided to go for a newly built one. The first one we saw came with 2 acres of land in a new subdivision. If I bought it, Sarah wouldn't have to change schools. The house had all the basics I needed, though the basement was unfinished. Right there, I made a cash offer with a substantial deposit, under the asking price, and requested a 5-year new home warranty in exchange for a 4-day closing. The real estate agent thought I was being too pushy. After leaving her, I went and got a new set of door locks. When I got home, I texted Jasmine and Sarah to let them know where I was. That's when I began searching the rest of the house. Thankfully, I didn't find any prohibited substances, but I did find a stack of bearer bonds from a local bank, each worth $10,000, payable on demand. I turned on the early news and saw that the local police had informed the TV station that they had searched both our residences and found several items linked to the person responsible for the shooting. They also mentioned that additional charges were likely. I figured they made that announcement to take the pressure off of us. After changing all the locks and resetting the security codes, I continued my search. I discovered some expensive jewelry that I never knew my wife owned. Eventually, after thoroughly searching the house, I returned to the attic with a high-powered industrial light for a second inspection. That's when I found additional bags of cash hidden in the darkest corner of the attic. These bags were also stuffed with money. Using the card I'd been given, I called the detective again to inform him of my discovery. Before they arrived, I took a few bundles of cash from each bag and kept them for myself. I was starting to believe that Jack had been dealing prohibited substances for years and making a good profit. The detective removed the 20 bags from the house, shaking his head in disbelief. It seemed he, like me, was struggling to comprehend what I had uncovered. That's when I realized that if I had left the ledger book with the cash, it would have all been connected. "Officer, we've been their neighbors for 20 years. Could he have been dealing prohibited substances all this time?" I asked. "Considering he's been living under an assumed name for even longer, I'd say it's more than possible," the detective replied. "There are countless cases of women living with serial killers for years without knowing. Why would this be any different? I'm very interested in questioning your wife about her relationship with him and how long it lasted. Then you should know that I found out late last night that Jack, as we know him, was my wife's high school best friend's husband before he married Jasmine," I explained. "His ex-wife Ashley might be flying in this Saturday to confirm what she's been told herself." He smiled at me just as Jasmine pulled into her driveway and said, "This just keeps getting more interesting. Does his current wife know?" "Yes, and I'm about to go over and thoroughly search her house," I replied. "After last night's attempted break-in, we figured it was necessary." "I'll be ready to be called again," the detective said with a grin. "I'll be interviewing Jack for the second time later today. The truck had a false floor filled with prohibited substances. He's done for good." Jasmine walked over and said, "Officer, good to see you again. You should expect a call from my lawyer regarding my husband's identity. He wants to use it to get our marriage annulled immediately." Jasmine watched as the detective drove away. Following his advice, we searched her house, flushing anything that looked like prohibited substances. Better safe than sorry. Jasmine began packing her clothes, planning to move into my son's apartment for safety reasons. Like at my place, we found bearer bonds, which she packed to take with her. When we finished, she was relieved that we found so little. I told her I had made an offer on a newly built house and was planning to use the bearer bonds as part of the payment if the offer was accepted. She asked which agent I used, and I told her. "Do you think Shauna was working with him?" Jasmine asked. "Or was he conning her like he did us?" "That's unclear because we've had each other's house keys for years," I pointed out. "He could have come in while we were all out and hidden things at any time. What surprised me was that he wasn't smart enough to legitimize a lot of the money he saved. My daughter and I visited Hunter together. He told me everything. I found out that it all started around the time I was supposed to return home, but I missed it because I was busy with other exercises." Hunter was slowly recovering. He wasn't sure if he and Jasmine would get married, so they decided to live together as a couple to see if their age difference would work. "I can't argue with that logic, son," I said. "It sounds mature and measured." "Thanks, Dad," Hunter replied. "I appreciate everything you do for Jasmine. Now that I look at it from your point of view, I don't understand how you're coping." "Son, maybe I don't agree with what your mother did," I said. "But I wasn't there for her because of my choice of profession. Her loneliness forced her to seek solace elsewhere. If I ever have another relationship, I'll need to live a different life. Sarah looked at me and said, "You don't have any anger or hatred in you, and you don't blame her for what she did. I want to do something terrible to her." "I put work first and put the upbringing of both of you on her," I said. "When you both grew up and became independent, she was left without the attention and love she obviously needed. I'm sad about what she did, but I can't hate her for it, and I won't judge her, even if it ended our marriage. Besides, she may have even bigger problems ahead." "For example, which ones?" Hunter asked. "If the police connect her to what your Uncle Jack was involved in," I said, "she could spend a long time in prison, too. It has always amazed me how often people overlook what is right in front of them. The truth that I shared with my children left them speechless." Around 9 in the morning on Saturday, I received news that my offer on the house had been accepted. 30 minutes later, I was sitting in the broker's office, handing over the funds for the substantial deposit, using some of the bearer bonds I had come across. During this, I got a text message that read, "Can we meet? I'm Gus's sister, Ashley." I replied, asking where she was. She responded, "At the airport." I texted back, "I'll be there in 15 minutes. "You got an exceptionally good price on your new home," the broker remarked. I was surprised he accepted it so quickly. "That's why I asked you if he had sold any of the others already," I said. "A sold sign can attract more interest." With that sorted, I made my way to the airport. As soon as I walked through the door, I spotted her. It had to be her, given that the small airport was nearly deserted, as the plane had just departed for St. Louis with its passengers. Ashley was quite attractive. Her brown hair was styled in a way that accentuated the softness of her face. She had a naturally appealing figure that didn't need any enhancement from her clothing. The stylish blue jeans she wore exuded a sense of class without being overly extravagant. My initial impression was that she was a woman who was very comfortable with herself. She approached me and said, "You haven't changed much from the pictures Gus sent me. It's nice to meet you, Mr. Phillips." "Please call me Harold," I replied, extending my hand. We went to the airport restaurant and took a seat at a table. I offered to buy her an early lunch, and she accepted. For a while, we just talked, getting to know each other better. She noticed I wasn't wearing a ring, and I explained that I never wore it while working on the rigs, and after learning about my wife's affair from my daughter, I had no intention of putting it back on. I also learned that she had resumed using her maiden name after her divorce. As we were having our early lunch, the last flight of the morning arrived from St. Louis. Ashley and I were seated by a window that let us watch the passengers disembark and walk through the gate, and it offered a clear view of the small airport's open area. The waitress had just refilled our coffee cups when I saw Shauna coming through the gate. I raised my hand and waved. Ashley turned to see who I was waving at. When Shauna saw the two of us together, she froze in shock, her face turning pale. I knew she hadn't read the local news online, so she had no idea what was happening. As she processed the new situation, we watched the detective approach her and introduce himself with his badge. He then escorted her to collect her luggage. "She didn't know you were in town, did she?" Ashley asked. "No, we purposely kept that information from her," I replied. "Whatever plans she had to address the situation are now irrelevant. She's about to find out about the cash, the prohibited substances, and the ledger that were discovered in Jasmine's and my house." "May I take on your divorce case?" Ashley asked. "It'll be satisfying to take her down. The fact that she and my ex are together has raised a lot of questions about everything we did back then." "Will the office permit you to travel back and forth while handling this?" I asked. "I run my own divorce firm from home," Ashley said. "Besides, I'll be here dealing with my deadbeat ex anyway." I must have smiled, because she said, "It looks like we have a deal. If you have a printer, we can draft it up today." We loaded her luggage into the back of my truck. I informed her that her ex-husband was in the county jail in Jackson. She said she wanted to talk to him, so I drove her there and waited while she went inside. It took her about an hour to come out. "He was stunned to see me," Ashley said. "He asked how I found him, and I told him it was thanks to you. I then informed him that the police had searched his house and yours, seizing all the prohibited substances and monetary items they found. I also mentioned that they had discovered the ledger Sarah had written." His face went pale. I looked at her and gave a bigger smile than before. I grabbed my cell phone and called the detective, who answered on the first ring. I explained what I had learned and how I came by the information. He told me that a handwriting comparison would be done to link her to the prohibited substances, but not to the cash, since the ledger was their contact list of suppliers and buyers. "So, my soon-to-be ex might have been involved all along," I said. "This should make it easier to finalize the divorce. She'll need her share for legal fees." "Yes, it will," the detective agreed. "We'll be charging her later today as an accessory, which means she won't have a bail hearing until at least Monday." With that settled, we headed back to my place to start drafting the divorce petition. On the way, I explained how our finances had been organized throughout most of our marriage. "Smart move on both your parts," Ashley commented. "By having separate savings accounts, we can argue that they weren't part of the marriage assets." As soon as we got home, we got to work. Ashley on the divorce petition, and me on brewing a pot of coffee. I emailed her the images Jasmine had provided me. I told her I didn't want the house because of everything that had happened. Ashley asked if Shauna would have enough to buy me out. I said that based on how we split the household funds, she should. It took us about another 2 hours to get everything ready for printing. After giving Ashley the access code, I turned on the printer. Just as we were sorting out the copies and preparing to file them with the county court on Monday, my daughter returned from being out with her friends. There was an immediate spark between them. After the introductions, I filled my daughter in on who she was. "Sarah, I'd like you to meet Ashley Lynn Charles," I said. "Her family still resides in the village of Dutchtown." "And Ashley, this is my daughter Sarah," I continued. "She'll be moving into my new house with me next week once we've bought the furniture." Sarah's eyes widened with excitement as she leaped into my arms, hugging me tightly before asking, "What did you buy?" "A newly built house with 3 bedrooms, an open floor plan, a 2-car garage, an unfinished basement on the ground level, and a raised patio deck. There's just one issue with it." "What's that, Dad?" Sarah inquired. "It's not landscaped," I said. "So, I'll be considering the cost of a pool after the closing on Monday." Her eyes lit up. Sarah had wanted a pool for years, but I had been hesitant because I didn't want to disrupt the landscaping we had already done. Since it was nearly dinner time, I asked where they wanted to go. Both chose Ruby Tuesdays because of their extensive salad bar. After dinner, we took her to Enterprise Car Rental so she could get a vehicle. Sarah invited Ashley to join us on Sunday to look at furniture. Ashley happily agreed, so that's what we planned. On Monday, I was in the courtroom observing the charges being presented before the judge for the man known to me as Jack Parsons and my wife. Jack's bail was denied, while my wife's bail was set at $500,000, requiring her to provide 10%. Ashley approached and served her on my behalf, then served her ex-husband for back support. As she returned to me, she took my hand. I was sure both Jack and Shauna noticed. Together, we left them to their thoughts. Earlier that day, I had dropped off the remaining bearer bonds needed to complete the house purchase. Ashley had handled and paid the court fees for my divorce. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, I went to finalize the purchase of my new home. I had just left the land title office with the transfer completed and a check for the interest from the bearer bonds in my hands when Ashley called. She had found a letter on her rental car parked at her parents' property. It was a demand note. They were holding my daughter Sarah and wanted everything I had that hadn't been turned over to the police. I decided to respond in kind. I instructed Ashley to tell them I would meet them at Trail of Tears State Park at midnight tonight, providing the exact location for the meeting. After going home, I contemplated for a while and then grabbed a few small propane containers, attaching one to a welder's hand rig. I put it in my truck, along with an old tent I hadn't used in years, and my crossbow. It wasn't long before my tent was set up. I was ready for the night. With my sports bag filled with necessary tools, I ventured into the darkness. The spot I had chosen was along the Mississippi River at the edge of a cliff. Years ago, the state had built a railing there, making it a viewing area of the river. From that vantage point, it was a straight drop to the river below. I attached a duffel bag with papers to the railing and left it hanging over the edge. To get the bag, you had to lean over the railing. It took me 3 hours to cut the bolts so that there was nothing left to hold the railing in place. I was lucky because it started to rain. I hid and watched the path, noticing a man approaching. Using night vision goggles, I was able to clearly see the man's face. He and his brothers lived near Dutchtown and were friends of Jack Parsons. I wondered if he was involved in a prohibited business. I waited half an hour longer than the scheduled time to make sure he wasn't being followed. The landing site was illuminated by a full moon, and the area was wet with rain. Then I went out into the clearing behind him. "That's how it's going to be, Earl," I said, turning on the bright light aimed at the rope. "What you want is attached to the railing. You will receive this as soon as your brothers take my daughter to my lawyer's house. I'll put down the crossbow and leave as soon as my lawyer contacts me," I added. "What if I don't agree?" Earl asked. "I'll shoot an arrow and go after the rest of your brothers tonight," I replied. Earl couldn't risk exposing my bluff. He took out his cell phone and called. It was nice to watch him sweat, knowing that he could see my crossbow perfectly, loaded with 3 arrows. "Jack thought you'd become a wimp," Earl said. "He's planning an escape, and he needs bearer bonds to get out of town with your wife." "I suppose you and your brothers are listed in the ledger," I said. "How do you know about the ledger?" Earl asked. "I handed her over to the police," I replied. "It's only a matter of time before you all die. If my daughter is returned safely, you might want to consider using the contents of the bag to disappear." Earl began to panic. Like most naive people, not knowing the situation was eating at him. He asked if he could make another phone call, and I gave him the nod. I listened as he spoke. "Drop the girl off and get out of there. The cops have the ledger book we were after. If anything happens to the girl, we're all done for. It's just a matter of time." About 10 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Ashley, confirming that Sarah had arrived unharmed. I turned off the lights and slipped back into the shadows. Earl leaned over the railing to pull up the bag, but with nothing to hold him, his weight sent him over the edge. Once that was done, I made my way back to my tent and went to sleep. It would be 2 weeks before they found Earl's body. Jack Parsons didn't take the news well. Early Tuesday morning, I drove to Ashley's parents' place. My daughter ran out to greet me. I was invited in for a big breakfast and learned a few things. Our county sheriff was retiring, and Gus, Ashley's father, was a significant figure in the local Democratic Party. Over breakfast, I mentioned that I should run for the position. He asked if I was willing to take the state courses required to qualify. I agreed. "Well then, it looks like your campaign has officially begun," he said. The look of pride in my daughter's eyes said it all as she spoke. "One thing I've learned about my dad is that when he sets his mind to something, it gets done." I handed my daughter my cell phone and told her to listen to a conversation I had recorded with her mother last Friday morning. It was fascinating to watch all 4 of them as they listened. My daughter asked, "Mom was never going to be honest with you, was she?" "Nope," I replied. "I've started to wonder if she was the one who got Jack back into the prohibited substances business, using the money I earned to finance it." That revelation surprised them all. To be honest, it surprised me too. "Just so we're all on the same page, I think we should keep everything that's happened since Ashley found the note to ourselves," I said. "Things didn't turn out the way Jack and Shauna wanted." They watched as I called the detective to inform him that Jack Parsons was planning a breakout in the next few days. I mentioned that if he succeeded, he and his lover would likely flee. The detective, with a serious tone, remarked that I should have been a cop myself, given my knack for uncovering information. On our way back to Cape, my phone rang. It was Shauna, soon to be my ex-wife. "I'll be out on bail in 2 hours," she said. "I was wondering if I could access the house." Ashley and Sarah looked at me, curious about how I would respond. "You can take possession of the house later this afternoon," I replied. "My lawyer will bring your car to the Love Nest and give you the key to it, as well as the new keys to the house. Sarah and I should have most of our things moved out by then. We'll take the rest while you're at work this week." After hanging up, I turned to Ashley and asked, "Would you mind overseeing the furniture delivery today? They've been paid to set it up." "I'd be happy to," she replied. "If I recall correctly, the appliance dealer will arrive by 10 and the 3 furniture companies will follow shortly after." Sarah and I dropped Ashley off first. It was their first time seeing the new house, and they loved the open floor plan and the size of the place. Sarah chose her bedroom, thrilled that it had its own bathroom and walk-in closet. "Dad, should we bring the pots, pans, and basic stuff from the old house?" she asked. I thought for a moment, and then said, "No, let's start fresh after we've packed up the personal items we want and brought them back here. I'll take over, and you and Ashley can go shopping for what the house needs." Ashley mentioned, "Thankfully, most of the windows have built-in blinds. That'll give you some privacy until you get curtains." As Sarah and I were leaving, Ashley and I were saying our goodbyes when my son called out, "Dad!" Jasmine and he had just come out of the house across the street. They walked over, and I introduced them to each other. It was interesting to see Jasmine and Ashley subtly sizing each other up. Despite their different skin tones, their builds were quite similar, and I realized why I was so drawn to Ashley. Before heading back to the house to pack our clothes, I went to the bank and opened a new checking account by transferring funds from my savings. I got new debit cards for both Sarah and me, paid off my credit card balance, and had my paycheck redirected to the new account. The wardrobe boxes I had picked up made packing and moving easy. It only took a couple of hours to load everything. At the bottom of one of my boxes, I placed the bearer bonds I had kept. I also took a few minutes to gather the 50 bundles of 50s I had stored in the attic. I reminded Sarah to change all her passwords, especially since she needed to bring her laptop. After unloading the wardrobe boxes, the ladies headed out. I spent the time breaking down the boxes our furniture came in and created a burn pile in the front yard. I called AT&T to set up the internet. The ladies returned with a truckload of items just as the delivery drivers were leaving. We had the master bedroom and Sarah's room set up, the living and family rooms organized, and the wooden table and chairs placed in the open area near the kitchen, which even had a counter we could eat at if we wanted. Each room had the essentials to start our new home. All we needed was the internet to get the TV working, but if necessary, we could always watch Pluto TV on the laptop if there was free Wi-Fi in the area. After unloading the truck, which was packed with almost everything except the kitchen sink, Ashley and I headed to my old house to pick up Shauna's car and deliver it to her. I watched Ashley go inside and waited for about an hour until she came back out. When Ashley got back into the truck, I asked her, "Did you find any of the answers you were looking for?" "Not really," Ashley replied. "They didn't have a relationship while my husband and I were together. They got involved afterward. I also found out that she was planning to divorce you once Sarah finished school." "They've been together for about 6 years," Ashley continued. "Raymond has been dealing prohibited substances the entire time you've known him. Shauna claims she didn't know what was in your house, but I don't believe her. I recorded the entire conversation thanks to Sarah syncing her phone with mine." "Do you think we should send the file to the detective?" I asked while driving. "Yes, I think we should," Ashley said with a laugh. "Am I right in thinking you want to see where our relationship could go?" "I thought we were already working on that," I said. "Even your parents noticed the attraction." Ashley scooted closer to me and said, "Sarah suggested KFC or fish and chips for dinner." We picked up KFC before heading back to the new place. Sarah had been busy while we were out. She'd already washed one set of sheets and had the second load in the washer to make our beds. Most of the groceries were put away, and the dishwasher was running to give our dishes a quick rinse and dry to sanitize them. I was pleasantly surprised to find they'd bought 2 bottles of sour mash and some Coke, so we each had a drink as we ate at the table for the first time. After dinner, I went up to the master bedroom to put my things away. I had already unpacked most of the boxes and turned my attention to the suitcase I had brought with me. I took out my shaving brush and cup from the suitcase, reminiscing about when my grandfather had given me that old cup. To get a good brush, you had to order it online, and I hoped to pass it on to my own grandchildren someday, just as it had been passed down to me. The ladies came in to make the queen-size bed and set up the towels in the master bedroom, along with the mats and small trash can. They even bought an alarm clock radio for my nightstand. The small lights complemented the bedding perfectly. I chuckled when I saw they had placed 2 narrow rugs on either side of the bed. Sarah, knowing my preferences, had even provided my favorite shower gel, body soap, and shampoo. I carried the boxes down and added them to the burn pile. Noticing a few more empty boxes left by the ladies, I took those out as well. The kitchen was all set up. I needed to check all the cupboards to see how everything was arranged. The new coffee maker and toaster were on the counter, and the microwave was in its designated spot. I was pleased with how everything was coming together. The women hurried downstairs to gather the items needed for Sarah's room, bringing along a few bags I hadn't seen before. It took them about an hour to finish everything. Since it was a pleasant evening, I decided to go outside with my lighter and set the burn pile ablaze. Watching the flames rise into the night sky was quite captivating. I was so absorbed in the sight that I nearly missed the call on my cell phone. It was from my soon-to-be ex. "It's all gone," she said. "From both places. Where is it?" "You'd better call the detective and ask him," I replied with a laugh. "You knew," she said. "So how did you get Sarah back?" "Ask Earl or his brothers if you can find them," I said. The silence on the other end spoke volumes. I ended the call and put the phone back in my pocket. Then my son, Hunter, called. "Dad, we bought the house across the street. Mom called and wants to talk." "Just so you know, I told her where to go and how to get there. She wasn't happy about it, so expect her to blame you for that as well." We continued our conversation for a few more minutes. He had some questions about Jasmine and Ashley's future relationship. I emphasized that the important point was that both had been used by him, and they needed to work things out themselves. After having a smoke, I noticed that the fire had died down enough and most of the cardboard had burned, so I decided it was time to head back into my new house. As I entered, I heard the washer running. Sarah came up to me and said goodnight. "I'll lock the door when I go out to drive Ashley home," I told her. The look on my daughter's face was one of total confusion. Ashley then came down the stairs wearing a new nightgown and housecoat. It was then I realized I needed to go have a shave and a shower. I understood why my daughter had looked so puzzled. It was Ashley's clothing that was in the washer. A knock on the door woke me up the next morning. My daughter needed a ride to school. I got dressed and met her at the front door, where Sarah greeted me with a big smile. "Dad, you haven't looked this happy in years," she said. "I'm happy for you." I dropped her off, promising to return and pick her up later. Coming home and relaxing was a pleasure. For the first time since leaving the rigs, I had nothing pressing to do except spend time with Ashley, which I did a lot. Around lunchtime, Ataud arrived to set up the internet. Around 1, Ashley's parents arrived with her rental car and clothes. Shortly after, a photographer came to take a professional picture of me for signage. George Charles estimated that the signatures needed to register my run would be completed by the end of the week. I handed him $5,000 in cash for my campaign. Ashley gave her mother a tour of the new house, and Glenda was thrilled with how Ashley had begun to personalize it. From their conversation, I learned that Ashley had already been incorporating her style when she helped us select the furniture. I asked George, "Did I ever stand a chance?" "To be honest," he replied, "when she came home on Saturday night, I was completely shocked when she said she had met the man she wanted to spend the rest of her life with." "When things went south on Monday," he continued, "after checking the coordinates on Google Maps, she mentioned that Dad Harold was taking the opportunity away from whoever was holding Sarah. She showed up unharmed around 1 a.m. Sarah explained that she didn't know exactly what had happened, but those holding her were very frightened and quickly released her after receiving a second phone call," he went on. "She could tell from their interaction that they were related." "It was Ed Racine and his brothers," I said. "Even in high school, they had a reputation for being lowlifes. When Ed faced a loaded crossbow with 3 arrows less than 10 feet away, his attitude changed. I gave him one chance to surrender or face death. He thought about it for a moment. To add pressure, I told him to call his brothers and warn them that I was coming. I can honestly say he was still alive when I left him." "What about now?" George asked. "Time will tell," I answered. "Who knows what the future holds?" A smile appeared on Ashley's father's face as he said, "Your old school ways, Harold. Welcome you to the family. I'd be proud to have a grandson from you." From that statement, I understood everything I needed to know about the man sitting across the table from me. He was just as old school as I was. We were like the James brothers, having grown larger than life itself. In our daily lives, we did what needed to be done. We were as tough as Missouri red mud. It had been 6 months since I returned home. We were all glued to the local news, waiting for the results. My parents, Ashley's parents, Jasmine and Hunter, who had just gotten married, took turns holding my newborn grandson, along with the 3 of us. Shauna and the man we knew as Jack had been sentenced to life without parole. My divorce had been finalized. My former employer, using my shares and company retirement fund, had granted me an early full retirement. Even after my death, they would still owe my estate money. George was thrilled because I was leading comfortably in the polls. 3 days earlier, the police department had returned the money I had found, and I had been escorted to deposit over $6 million into the bank. Sarah got her swimming pool, and Ashley now had 4 staff working out of our home's basement, with her new location becoming quite successful. I walked over and knelt in front of Ashley before we joined our supporters for the election celebration and said, "Will you marry me?" When she said yes, I slipped the ring onto her finger. At that moment, the news declared me as the winner. George was as proud as a peacock in full display, not only because of our official engagement, but also because there was a new sheriff in town.